Hello and welcome to the Language Revolution podcast. My name is Kate Hamilton. I'm a languages teacher and founder of Babel Babies. The aim of this podcast is to get people talking about talking. So without further ado, let's get started. Today I am back talking to Dr. Katerina Kantatsis, Katerina Draper from the University of Gloucestershire, a senior lecturer in psychology. And this is our second talk where we are talking about how children learn languages. And in our first episode, if you've not heard it, we discussed the whole language acquisition process, how it starts before birth, and how children are kind of, innately ready to learn language, from before birth. And what we said we'd talk about today is how they do more than one language and really get into the sort of the process of that and how it works and how parents can support that process. Absolutely. And some of the tricks of the trade. Because as well as being a psychology lecturer, you are also a bilingual person.
I am, yes.
And you have children who are, being brought up with two languages.
Yeah.
So tell us a little bit about your kind of language adventures, if you like.
So I grew up in Greece. My dad is Greek and my mum is British. So I grew up with both languages. So I actually spoke Greek first. And then I happened to go to an English speaking nursery, and then I spoke more English than I did Greek. And then throughout my life it sort of varied. I'd go from being sort of more dominant Greek, then more dominant English, and then I found my social language was stronger in Greek because more of my friends were Greek, whereas my academic language was more English because that's what I was learning in. So it really varied through my life, and I've now lived in the UK for over 10 years. I can't remember exactly how many, but over 10 years. And, predominantly I speak English, both at work and at home. My husband's English, and now I've got a little boy and another one on the way. We don't know whether it's a boy or a girl, and we are bringing him up bilingual. He's got a lot more exposure to English, obviously, because on a day-to-day basis I'm the only person who speaks Greek, although my husband is making a very, very good effort to learn more Greek words and interact with him, because he seems to be responding better to my husband speaking Greek than he does me, which is very bizarre. But yeah, it's there's no recipe, I think. But yeah, we'll talk about that.
So that's I think one of the key points that we're going to talk about is that actually having a bilingual family or a multilingual family, there isn't one cut and paste way of doing it.
No, absolutely not.
So in the first series of the podcast, Thomas Bach and I discussed how our brains are actually kind of primed and have developed or evolved to be multilingual, and that having one language is perhaps the unusual. Yeah,
I think in the UK it's really, well, in not just the UK, but we're talking about the UK here, but it's quite unusual that the majority of people only speak one language. Across the world. Multilingualism is the absolute norm.
Yes.
Whether it's that there's a main language that your tribe speaks, but then the country speaks a different one, and then you also learn the couple of languages that your neighbouring tribes learn because you need to interact with them, for example. And
maybe the language of trade of boats coming in at the coast.
Yeah. So there's lots of different, we're quite an exception in the UK, only having one language.
So in that context, it feels like bilingualism is, the unusual thing, but actually key point to sort of lay on the table is that it is perfectly normal.
Yes, absolutely.
And our brains are very well adapted. So if you haven't listened to the first series, then go and listen to Thomas and I discussing why multilingual is normal. But for parents introducing more than one language to their children, it can perhaps feel quite daunting.
It is daunting.
Talk us through how it might work.
So, I think the classic model that a lot of families quite like is one parent speaks one language and the other parent speaks another. And in a way, it's a very comforting model, because you can be reasonably sure that baby is getting, or young child is getting, equal exposure to both languages. I'm talking about 2, it could be 10, but it may keep it simple, but 2 languages. And you can be reasonably sure that they're getting equal exposure. It's and that's quite reassuring for parents to know that, we haven't used more English than we have Greek, say in my situation. But actually it's not necessary. You can have families that are speaking 3 languages in the same sentence, and conversations can be taking place with one person speaking one language, another speaking a different one, and it really doesn't matter in a sense.
What does matter then? Is it just that the point gets made?
It's important that they hear them, primarily, as we were talking in the first episode about, the sounds of the language and how different languages have different sounds. So it's important that they get exposed to those sounds. And again, as we were talking about in the first episode, that communication, that there's a back and forth, there's an interaction between...
Yes, it's a rich interaction with the language.
And what you'll find from sort of older bilinguals is that they find some words in some languages more comfortable than others. Maybe it's just that the word matches what they're trying to say a bit better, or maybe it's a bit more close to the concept that they're trying to express, for example.
Yes. It's because you've got a menu of options. Exactly. You're going to pick the word that is the most readily available as well, aren't you?
So if you really like the word for cat in a language, then use that word if that describes that situation better than say the other language that you speak at home.
I was having an interesting chat with my taxi driver the other week when I went to the linguistics conference in Cambridge, and he said his family speaks Urdu and Punjabi, and that they will speak English as well. So they will say things like put it in the dubba, which is the Tupperware, and the dubba is far more readily available word for Tupperware. And that's just, a very multilingual, normal thing to do, isn't it?
Absolutely.
So parents don't have to be entirely strict. So, if you are, say, in a family where you've got Greek one parent, English another parent, and you swap the languages around a bit,
it doesn't matter.
It's not going to matter.
No, and as I said, we realised that for some reason my son was picking up... was happier to sort of interact in Greek and pick up words from my husband. So, I've now focused on teaching my husband more Greek words, or he'd like me to do it more, but, and he's really focusing on learning words so that he can then pass them on to our little one.
It really is very dependent on the context of each family, isn't it? So, there isn't a right way of doing it because it's just your way of doing it.
Yeah, exactly.
And what's comfortable. And the key thing is that you are actually doing the languages, so it's not sort of a question of nitpicking about methodology as much as just what's comfortable for you guys in your own house. So,
and the interaction, I think that's what's key. I think I sometimes, some parents ask me about multilingualism, and I will say, well, just have the radio on in your other language. So if it's, say, English and Italian, maybe put Italian radio on in the background, and that's fine because they're hearing the sounds, they're hearing the interaction, but actually it's nowhere near as rich as if you were just having a conversation with the child in that language. It's fine, they're hearing the sounds, and that's good, it's part of their environment, it's part of their day-to-day living, but they won't get as much, particularly before the age of 2, from TV or radio as they would from actually interacting with
exactly.
you.
So it is very much about the interaction, as we were talking about in episode 1. I remember a study of children who were learning Chinese, I think, in America, and they had some children with a nanny, some children doing lessons via Skype, and some children having a DVD of Chinese. And I think the findings were that the DVD had no effect on these young children because it's just not interactive. But surprisingly, it wasn't the screen that was a barrier, because the Skype and the nanny had a really similar. It's really very much
about that interaction. So, we can talk, it would be a whole other episode on the effects of technology, but, technology can be used in a really positive way.
Yes.
You could have a DVD in that, in the other language that you're wanting to learn as well. And they can watch it, but, talk to them about it and ask them questions and label things and
do it together. Essentially.
Do it together, And if for whatever reason it was shapes that you were focusing on in that DVD, when you go out and you spot shapes, or if you're reading another book or you're cooking or whatever it is that you're doing and you spot those shapes, then relabel them. Re-establish those links in the other language.
Yes, exactly. And so even if a lot of my babies parents are not, say, fluent in another language, you can be modelling the learning process as well, can't you?
Yeah.
Which is really important for children to see. How do we actually pick these things up? It's not just beamed in from outer space.
Exactly.
There is a learning process. I remember learning French from Muzzy. Do you know the big green monster? There's a BBC series, and it's because my parents, we were all chatting about it, and Muzzy became part of our conversations, and so it's not actually the fact that it's technology that will put children off,
and I think it's how technology's done. I'm really interested in, and I don't think anyone's done this research yet, but differences between, say, programs like Dora the Explorer, which is obviously doing it in a couple of languages, but she gives gaps to allow the children to respond. If anyone's watched Dora, I really feel sorry for you, but equally, she'll go, so where is it Swiper? So where's Swiper? And, it gives a gap in the dialogue for the children who are watching to respond.
Yes. And
I actually think that's probably better than a program where there's just dialogue going on all the time, because it allows the children to have that some element of interaction.
Right.
With
that would be interesting research. Let's chalk that one up for the future. So let's talk a little bit about some of the myths of multilingualism. Can you? We know we can't confuse a child, but just can you mix up your languages to the extent that even within a sentence you can sort of mix and match? I mean, is that
absolutely
children's comfortable with that?
Yeah, absolutely. So I grew up doing this. It was called talking Gringlish or Greeklish, as some people call it, and it's just that within a sentence you can use half one language, half another, or just throw a word in from one of the languages, and kids are fine with it. There seems to be something about children that means that they can quite readily divide languages and store them, if you like, in the appropriate language context. So there's very little confusion, and research showed that they can do this with very similar languages, so something like English and German, which a lot of the sounds and a lot of the words are very similar, and also very different languages. So a child that's learning English and Japanese, for example, will very easily divide languages and be able to understand which language is which, but so will a child who's learning English and German, which are much more similar.
So my best friend is English and German, and she will put German endings on English things, so something with a Leinchen on the end. And I used to work in Paris, and the lady I worked for was Spanish, Canadian, and married to a Frenchman. So her children had 3 languages. So the children would come in and say, "Maman, j'en veux, please," and they would just, they would mix the languages quite happily. Mainly to get what they wanted. As soon as possible.
I think there's lots of work on the suitability of words in context, and for some reason we seem to find some words, if you speak a number of languages, like those children are a great example, they've got 3 languages available to them, you will find the word that is most appropriate. Feelings is often a really good one, because they're quite hard to express. And if you find that in language A, there's not really a word that expresses how you're feeling, or you don't know a word that's expressing exactly how you're feeling, but you do know one in language B, then you might say, "Oh, I'm feeling X." And that, because it just fits better, or because it's easier, the example of the taxi driver, the word for Tupperware was much easier in the other language than it was in English, for example. So there's, we like to be efficient, as I said, I think in the first episode. Our brains like to be efficient, so, and we make the most of that.
Are we essentially just lazy then?
I don't know whether we're lazy, we're just efficient.
Efficient. It's a much kinder way of saying. So things that we can do to support a multilingual upbringing, perhaps even if you're not a multilingual family, but you want to get a language-rich environment for your children, what kind of things might parents do?
So, I'm thinking of a parent who really doesn't speak another language. Try things like singing, obviously, in different languages. We talked about the importance of music and nursery rhymes and language development in the first episode. So, and that holds true in second, third, fifth, 10th language acquisition. It makes it into a really positive experience without any sort of, you're not sitting down with a book, teaching them the letters, which brings me nicely on. Books are great, probably ones where you can understand the alphabet, so you can start trying to decipher what the words might sound like, so you can label the words. There's lots of books out there that will be like my first 10 Spanish words, for example. You know, use that one instead of your standard English 10-word book. You know,
that's an interesting point. Is it useful to teach words in isolation, or should we try and do something in the context?
Not really. I mean, I think in terms of books, you know, it's fine to go through and go, oh, look, it's a ball, or that's fine. But then they need to be put into context. You know, it's fine reading a book, and, you know, I would never be an advocate of not reading a book in any context. I think reading books is so important for everyone. But you then need to go, oh, look, it's like the you know, I'll use the Greek. So say you've learnt bala, which is ball in Greek, and then you go out to the park with the bala, you know, and then you're reinforcing that conversation, and you're putting it into the real world and giving the child the opportunity to practice.
Yes, and you're kind of almost holding this word up and looking at it from all angles.
Absolutely.
And like if you imagine a child picking up a little a block that fits in different shaped holes, they're going to try that, aren't they, in lots of different ways. So a colleague of mine has Italian husband and Italian speaking children, and they speak English and Italian, and they will try the word for milk in different contexts, like in nursery. And in nursery they'll get a sort of shrug, like, oh no, I don't know, latte. She's looking for milk. And then eventually they'll work out, well, that shaped brick doesn't fit in this shaped hole.
Absolutely.
So then they will become more accurate.
Yeah. And very quickly, you know, there's lots of videos on the internet, but also, you know, studies that have been done that very young children very quickly pick up who understands what language. So, you know, my little boy wouldn't go to my husband's parents and start speaking Greek to them because he knows that they wouldn't understand. So they very quickly pick up on...
They've done a lot of trial and error processing, haven't they, by that point?
And, you know, it's all about that interaction again. They'll see that they're not getting that interaction from those adults because they don't necessarily have those words.
So again, it comes to the positive reinforcement then. So if somebody gives you a blank look, you think, oh, hang on, that didn't work.
I'll try something else.
I'll try option B in my repertoire.
Yeah.
Oh, that's interesting. So we've got songs and books, and we can also just, you know, do our TV chef kind of narration of the day.
Absolutely.
And try and put some, you know, new words in. I mean, I really advocate learning together. So if you don't know how to do something and you want your children to be learning, say, French or something, you know, do it together. It's you know, it's fine not to know the answers as well, isn't it?
Absolutely. And I think that, you know, that's an important lesson in parenting anyway, that it's fine not to know all the answers. But and that's kind of what I was getting to with the book, that you know, pick one up that you're, you know, there's no point picking up a Japanese book if you don't know the Japanese alphabet, because you're never going to be able to decipher unless it's been anglicized in its writing. But script, you know, you don't understand it. So, you know, pick up a Spanish book, for example, and the alphabet's the same. You can pretty much make out the words. You might get some of the pronunciations wrong. It really doesn't matter.
But a lot of books now, you get the audio linked text as well. So you can, you know, use the technology can be a tool that you can use to...
Yeah. And I'm very jealous, because I'm not as confident as I should be of people who are able to go to another country and just practice that language, and they don't mind, you know, they're aware that they're going to make mistakes and they're not going to pronounce things right, and their grammar's a little bit all over the place. But A, it's great practice because you're really submerging yourself in that language. And B, the locals, the native speakers of that language, will never object to somebody who's trying their best and making mistakes over somebody who just can't be bothered. You know, so, and I'm not a great advocate of it because I'm not brave enough, but I do know people who are incredible. So I think just try it, just go for it.
Yes, exactly, and build up your children's confidence in having a go. It's actually, it's really encouraging to see, you know, someone making effort. It's very human to want to interact with people, I think.
And kids will do what they see. You know, if they see you, as you say, making an effort and trialing things and, you know, making mistakes and being okay with that, then they will be the same. They will do that as well.
And at home as well, you can perhaps introduce, say, if you're playing with the farm animals, and you might make a context for yourself, or let's practice, you know, and try and learn the words for farm animals, or I wonder what animals say in different languages.
Exactly.
Like, you know, I know you've done a bit of research into onomatopoeia animal noises. So I remember getting completely stuck because I was doing French noises of animals with my son. I got to a giraffe and he was like, what does a giraffe say in French? I've got no idea what a giraffe says in French. So if you can...
I don't know what a giraffe says in English.
I don't know what a giraffe says in English either. So I think I should have planned that better and picked animals that I actually knew I could help find the noises for. But it's... just really interesting as an adult to kind of explore these things. So pigs, they have all sorts of interesting noises in different languages, and dogs, they say different things. Why is it that noises are represented differently?
So to be honest, this is still a relatively early stage research area, sort of that symbolic language, those links between things that we say and things that, so onomatopoeia, as you were saying, and other aspects of language. It's not really clear why we have different noises, because, a dog makes the same noise in England, in Japan, in Greece, in France. And yet we've got very different words for it.
We've got, different ways of representing that.
Exactly. And what
sound.
I think it probably is going back to what we were talking in the first podcast, where those sensitivities to sounds and how we put some of them in the cabinet. We will try and identify the sound that is closest to something that we are aware of in the noise that the dog, for example, is making. So a Greek speaker, so say a dog barks, a Greek speaker would hear a r sound in it, like rav, that's the Greek word for bark, rav, rav. An English speaker wouldn't hear r because that's not an English sound. So they would use a different sound. In Japanese, interesting, it's one. I don't know where the W comes from because we have it in English as well. It's woof, and French is
waff.
Waff.
Yeah.
So I don't know where the W comes from because I've never heard a dog.
And some of them is bow.
Yeah.
Oh, in English, I know we have bow wow as well. Yeah. So there's sort of a similarity. If we go back to Proto-Indo-European, maybe we'll find a link there. But the short answer is we're not sure why they're different, but in many ways they're also quite similar. So it would depend on your sounds that are available.
I think so, yeah. As I say, I'm speculating massively.
Yes, and perhaps how we write it down depends on, what we would expect to find. Yeah. Well, that's really interesting. Well, children always seem to like knowing what a fire engine noise is in different languages. And so it's one thing you could have a play with, basically. It's kind of good just to play with languages, isn't it?
It is, yeah. It's really good
and
fun.
Show that it's fun.
Onomatopoeia is such a great one. There's something, I think... I'm a bit biased because it is my area of research and what I did my PhD on, but I think onomatopoeia is fascinating. We use it all over the world, to my knowledge. It's pretty much universally used. And intuitively, I think there must be a special link there between, like we were talking about in the first episode, kids being able to understand that this noise that we're making from our mouths and this object or situation in the world, that they're linked. It's a really easy way to make that link. If I hear a cow going moo and somebody says, oh, look, it's a moo cow, you're very quickly making that link between the noise I'm making in my mouth and this object in the world. Yeah,
so my children really quickly learned that an Italian cow is la mucca because it sounded like moo cow, and and cows say moo, and so even in a multilingual way, like knowing that English and the Italian kind of came more easily because we could make the links. I think,
and you can see how it would make language more accessible before we became sort of cornered into using specific language. Oh, I'm an English speaker or I'm a German speaker. You just needed to communicate. You just needed the next person you saw to understand that there was a tiger about to attack.
Yes.
And so having a very quick symbolic way of communicating that, whether it was through gesture, whether it was through onomatopoeic type sounds, it was really important to be able to get that message across quickly.
Yes.
And I think that's kind of descended a little bit.
It's really interesting, isn't it? Is it coming back again to like the survival instinct that humans have, and language is a really important part of our
absolutely
what it is to be human and how we interact with each other. So if you're in a multilingual household, you want your child to be equally fluent in 2 languages?
Yeah.
I mean, is that really an achievable thing? Is there such a thing as equal proficiency?
I mean, I think probably for some people there is, but I mean, this is why doing studies with bilinguals is a nightmare, because there's so many different ways to become bilingual. Some people will learn 50-50 of each language from birth every day for the rest of their lives. Most people will have one language which maybe they're exposed to more because maybe it's the native language of the country they're living in, so their school, for example, is in that other language. Some people might suddenly move to a different country and at the age of 3 are having to pick up a whole new language to go to nursery or school, whatever with. So
just sorry to interrupt you, but just at that point, so a lot of people have moved to Britain, and is it bad to kind of keep the home, we call it the home language, although I really don't like that term, because that language isn't just, it doesn't stay in the house, does it? I mean, it comes with you with, I think it's a bit of an inadequate term to call it a home language, but parents sometimes get advised to stop speaking that language.
And it's really bad advice.
To focus on English. I mean, is that just...
Yeah, I think it's really, really bad advice. I think, I don't know how many times we've said communication in these 2 podcasts, but again, it comes down to communication, because that child has been thrown into this new environment, sometimes under quite, difficult circumstances. And actually what they want to do is meet people and make friends. And they've got a language that they can use, and they've got a ready population of children who can pick up some words, who can give them other words, and to see that interaction taking place. So getting that, let's say a little boy who's speaking Russian and doesn't know any English, to go into an English-speaking school, and very quickly, the kids will learn how to say good morning in Russian, and that will make him feel... settled.
And equally, he will learn how to say good morning in English
very quickly, because they need that interaction. It's going back to what we were saying in that first episode about as humans, we will create the opportunities for interaction, and we will find ways to communicate. And the most important thing is that we keep that communication going.
So those parents who have got another language that has been the primary language up until this point of moving to England, say, if they keep speaking Russian at home, that actually helps the acquisition of English, doesn't it?
Yeah, because it's giving the kids that confidence that I can speak and I can interact, and that there's something familiar in my environment. Child development isn't, it's not segmented. We can't just look at language. Language is part of our communication, which is part of our attachment, which is part of our development of self, which is, so it all goes into a bundle. And if you start tearing it apart and pulling things out, such as their native language, there's going to be implications potentially for other
and there's no one
elements.
Yes, exactly, there's not one bit that is it's all very joined together. It's woven, really, isn't it? It's like a cloth. Like, I quite often see things talking about the child's brain. It's like, well, it's not just in a jar of formaldehyde. It's very much part of a being, and we can't.
And not all brains look the same at birth.
No.
Yes, there's some. There's a typical brain, if you like, and we like people to fit in a sort of range of typicality. But to take a picture and say, "Oh, this child's brain hasn't developed." Well, how it should. Well, we don't know where it started from.
There is that really infamous photograph, which the popular press always pulls out, of 2 children's brains, and one is apparently the brain of a very neglected child, and it is, noticeably smaller and looks shrunk. So,
although there's no scale ever on any of the pictures, but
yes, exactly. So that is really problematic, isn't it? That picture, because it does not give you a context.
It doesn't give you any context. I think. I would hope most people understand that, a bit like Maslow's hierarchy of needs. A lot of people have heard of that. There's some basic needs that people need, and those include food, shelter, protection, etc. And then as you move up the hierarchy of needs, things like communication are really low, and interaction and love and care are really quite basic in terms of what we need in our environment. And I think taking away that, going back to your question about whether they shouldn't be speaking their native language if they come to the UK, you're taking away part of their interaction and their love and their self. You know, that is part of their self. They have learnt a series of words and concepts about who they are and where they are in the world,
and their relationship with their
relationship
family.
with other people. And you're taking that away. You know, you're taking away part of who they are.
So that could be really quite emotionally traumatizing. Like you were saying in one of our other conversations about the children who were evacuated from London. So tell me what happened there.
So it was so for a long time we believed that children basically needed food, shelter, and that was pretty much it. You know, if you got their basic needs covered, then they should grow and be fine and thrive.
Primarily physical, I noticed.
Physical, and then what we did was we noticed, quite in a natural context, I guess, that during the Second World War, where children were evacuated from London and their basic needs were being met, you know, they were with caring families quite often who had, you know, volunteered to look after these children to make sure they were safe while where their home city wasn't safe, and they had a good meal. They were in the countryside, so lots of fresh air. You know, on paper it looked like an idyllic situation, but actually what they found was that a lot of these children were miserable, and it was the first time that we realised that there's something really special about the link between parents and their children, and that children need to be with it. It might not have been the first time, but it was a solid example of parents are needed, and that familiarity and that context, and needing to know who you are.
Yes, so we're part. You know, we've got like an integrated life, haven't we?
Absolutely.
Everything is, you know,
nothing
fits together.
stands alone.
Take one part away, then the whole thing can, has a knock-on effect. Well, thank you so much, Kat. It's been really interesting to talk to you.
Yeah, it's been lovely.
And hopefully parents will feel like that they can just relax about languages with their children.
Absolutely. Just enjoy it.
Yeah, enjoy it. It's part of the whole upbringing. It's not just, you know, we can get really focused on language acquisition, and its importance, but actually it's part of the jigsaw, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And just as sort of personal example, we did Babel Babies when my little one was younger, and we went, just before he turned 1, we went on holiday in Tenerife, and I am that classic horrendous tourist who doesn't learn anything on holiday and just expects people to, probably because I've always gone on holiday to Greece, so I just assume that people are going to speak Greek, so it's never crossed my mind, and I was really pleased that I was able to actually have some conversation in Spanish with, you know, the waiters at the hotel, for example, or people in the shops. And, you know, my little one was watching that, and he would say hola to people in the morning, for example. So, you know, it was really nice to see the beginning of that confidence, I guess, in speaking more than one language.
Yes, right. And that confidence comes from a real secure sort of relationship pattern, doesn't it? And absolutely. That sort of part of the upbringing. That's wonderful. Thank you so much. What a lovely note to end on.
Thank you. Take care.
Bye.